crimson dust of Kepler-7 swirled around the makeshift arena as Commander Lisa Vale watched the human prisoner step into the ring. The crowd of assembled alien dignitaries fell silent, their various appendages and sensory organs focused on the scene below. What they were about to witness would either save humanity or condemn it forever. Marcus Reed looked small against his opponent, a towering Gorvian warrior whose chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the harsh binary suns. The creature stood nearly 3 meters tall, its forearms ending in razor-sharp claws that had torn through dozens of challengers. The Gorvian Empire's champion had never lost a trial by combat, and the assembled Council of 12 had expected this to be another routine execution disguised as sport. Lisa's hands clenched the viewing platform's railing. 3 months ago, humanity had made first contact with the Galactic Federation, only to discover they were being charged with crimes against the cosmic order. Their rapid expansion, their tendency toward violence, their stubborn refusal to submit to established hierarchies, all of it painted them as a dangerous species that needed to be contained or eliminated. The trial by combat was meant to be a mercy, one human against their greatest warrior. If Marcus won, humanity would be granted provisional membership in the Federation. If he lost, their home system would be blockaded until their civilization collapsed from isolation. Marcus rolled, his shoulders, ignoring the jeers and clicking sounds that passed for laughter among the various species present. At 32 years old, he was a former Marine Corps sergeant who had volunteered for this mission, knowing full well it was likely a death sentence. He wore simple combat fatigues, carried no weapons, and had refused the ceremonial armor offered by the Federation. His only concession to the formal nature of the event was removing his boots, standing barefoot on the burning sand. The Gorvian champion, called Thak Mor by his people, began the ritual display of dominance. He raised all 4 arms and released a bone-rattling roar that sent several smaller aliens scurrying backward. His claws extended fully, each one longer than a human hand, and he began the traditional war dance of his species. Marcus simply stood still, watching. "Human," Thakmor's voice boomed through the translation devices. "You should have sent your greatest warrior. Instead, you send me this soft thing." "I am exactly who I need to be," Marcus replied quietly, his voice somehow carrying clearly. Across the arena, despite not being raised, the formal challenge was issued. The Federation's High Arbiter, a crystalline being that communicated through harmonic resonances, announced the terms. Combat would continue until one fighter yielded, was incapacitated, or died. No weapons were permitted beyond natural abilities. Thakmor began circling, his movements surprisingly graceful for such a massive creature. Each step sent small tremors through the ground, and his claws carved shallow furrows in the hard-packed dirt. Marcus remained motionless in the center of the ring. The first attack came without warning, a lightning-fast swipe that should have opened Marcus from shoulder to hip. Instead, the human seemed to simply shift, and Thakmor's claws whistled through empty air. The Gorvian's momentum carried him past his target, and he had to scramble to regain his footing. A murmur ran through the crowd. That had been too close to call luck. Thakmor attacked again, this time with all 4 arms in a coordinated assault that created a cage of slashing death around where Marcus stood. But somehow, the human wasn't there when the claws arrived. He had moved. Not dramatically, not with any visible effort, but had simply occupied a different space when the attack landed. What was that? Lisa whispered, staggering slightly as she gripped the railing tighter. From the arena floor, Marcus's voice carried up to her, calm and certain. "My first move. Want to see the last?" Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. Sarge's Tale Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. The arena had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as 2 species watched a human do something that should have been impossible. Marcus Reed, former sergeant of Marines, stood unmarked in a circle of destruction, and for the first time in 1,000 years, Thakmor the Undefeated felt something he had never experienced before: uncertainty. The silence stretched for heartbeats that felt like eternities. Thakmor's compound eyes, hundreds of them clustered across his skull ridge, all focused on the human who had just done the impossible. In 3 decades of combat, no opponent had ever avoided his signature attack pattern: the forearm death. Dance was mathematically perfect, covering every possible escape route within a 2-meter radius, yet Marcus Reed stood untouched, not even breathing hard. Interesting. The High Arbiter's harmonic voice resonated through the arena's acoustic enhancers. The human appears to possess capabilities not documented in your species' profile. Lisa felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The Federation had spent months studying humanity, analyzing their military records, their physical capabilities, their technology. They had concluded that humans were a moderately dangerous species, clever tool users, with a talent for violence, but nothing that couldn't be contained by a sufficiently overwhelming force. Marcus had just proven that assessment catastrophically wrong. Thakmor circled again, but this time with more caution. His people were warriors above all else, and he recognized a superior fighter when he saw one. The human hadn't telegraphed his movement, hadn't shown any visible preparation. One moment he was in the path of certain death, the next he was safely outside it. How? Thakmor demanded, his voice carrying genuine curiosity alongside the challenge. Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if considering whether to answer. "So your species fights with honor," he said finally. "You announce your attacks, follow traditional patterns, give your opponent every chance to respond with equal dignity. It's admirable. And humans do not fight with honor." A ghost of a smile crossed Marcus's face. "We fight to win." The next exchange happened too fast for most of the assembled aliens to follow. Thakmor abandoned his ceremonial combat style and launched a savage, unpredictable assault. His claws became blurs of motion, striking from impossible angles, his massive body spinning and pivoting to bring different limbs into play. It was a display of raw violence that would have torn apart a dozen ordinary opponents. Marcus moved through it like water flowing around stones. He didn't block the attacks. He was never where they landed. He didn't counterattack. He didn't need to. He simply existed in the spaces between Thakmor's fury, occupying each safe zone for just long enough to avoid destruction before flowing to the next. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The assembled Federation representatives began making agitated sounds in their various languages. This wasn't how the demonstration was supposed to go. The human should have been dead within seconds, his species' fate sealed, the Council's decision validated. Instead, they were watching their greatest champion being made to look clumsy and predictable. Commander Vale found herself leaning forward, her heart hammering with a mixture of pride and fear. Marcus was incredible, but what would the Federation do when they realized humanity had been hiding capabilities like this? Would they honor the trial's outcome? Or would they decide that humans were too dangerous to be allowed to exist at all? Thakmor finally stopped his assault, stepping back with all 4 arms spread wide. His breath came in harsh rasps, and his exoskeleton glistened with the Gorvian equivalent of sweat. Marcus, meanwhile, looked as fresh as when the fight had begun. "You mock me," Thakmor said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "You do not even attempt to strike back." "I don't need to strike back," Marcus replied, his tone matter-of-fact rather than boastful. "You're defeating yourself." It was true. The Gorvians' wild attacks had torn gouges in the arena floor, sent sprays of sand into the air, and left him breathing hard from exertion. Meanwhile, his target remained untouched and seemingly unbothered by the display of violence. The psychological impact was devastating. Thakmor had built his reputation on overwhelming force and intimidation. Opponents either cowered before his might or died quickly under his claws. He had no framework for dealing with someone who simply refused to be where his attacks landed. "Fight me," he roared, frustration bleeding through his translator's mechanical voice. "Stand and face me as a warrior." Marcus spread his empty hands. "I am facing you. The question is, are you ready to face me?" Something in his tone, calm, patient, utterly confident, sent a chill through the arena. The assembled dignitaries, began to realize that what they were witnessing wasn't a trial by combat at all. It was a demonstration, and humanity was the one giving the lesson. The revelation rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Conversations erupted in a dozen different languages as the Federation representatives began to understand what they were truly witnessing. This wasn't a desperate human fighting for his species' survival. This was a predator playing with its prey. High Arbiter Resonance of Stars felt the harmonic frequencies of concern rising from the assembly. Through crystalline perception that operated outside normal electromagnetic spectra, the being observed probability cascades shifting in real time. The carefully calculated outcome of this trial was collapsing into chaos. Thakmor, meanwhile, had begun to panic. The emotion was alien to him, literally and figuratively. Gorvians were bred for war, genetically modified over millennia to be the perfect shock troops. Fear had been systematically eliminated from their psychological makeup, replaced with aggression and territorial dominance. Yet standing in that arena, facing a human who moved like smoke and struck like shadow, Thakmor felt something his ancestors would have called terror. "You're not fighting," he said, the words emerging as more plea than accusation. "This isn't combat. This is humiliation." Marcus stopped moving for the first time since the engagement began. He stood in the exact center of the arena, hands at his sides completely relaxed. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the amphitheater without amplification. "You want to see me fight? Very well." What happened next would be debated by xenobiologists for generations to come. Marcus didn't move faster. Speed implied haste, and there was nothing hurried about his actions. Instead, he moved with absolute precision, each gesture flowing seamlessly into the next as if choreographed by physics itself. He didn't attack Thakmor so much as he repositioned the Gorvian's own momentum against him. The first touch was barely contact, Marcus's fingertips brushing against Thakmor's leading arm, as the warrior lunged forward. But that gentle contact redirected 800 pounds of charging alien into an uncontrolled spin that sent him crashing into the arena wall. The second touch came as Thakmor rebounded from the impact, disoriented but still dangerous. Marcus was simply there, one hand resting lightly on the warrior's carapace. Thakmor found himself face down in the sand, all four limbs spread wide, completely immobilized by pressure applied to nerve clusters he didn't know he possessed. The entire sequence had taken perhaps 3 seconds. "Impossible," breathed Ambassador Velketh of the Spiral Confederation. Her species had fought the Gorvians for centuries before being absorbed into the Federation. She knew exactly how formidable Thakmor was supposed to be. "Our combat analysis indicated humans were Category 7 combatants at best. This displays Category 12 capabilities." "Our analysis was incomplete," admitted the High Arbiter, harmonic resonance indicating deep concern. "The human species appears to possess adaptive combat algorithms that exceed our modeling parameters." Lisa watched from above, her mind racing. She understood now why Marcus had volunteered for this mission, why he had insisted on going alone, why he had seemed so calm about what everyone assumed was a suicide mission. Somehow he had known that humanity possessed capabilities their enemies hadn't discovered. Marcus stepped back, allowing Thakmor to regain his feet. The Gorvian warrior stood slowly, testing his limbs for damage, his compound, eyes reflecting something that might have been respect. "How?" he asked simply. "We adapt," Marcus replied. "It's what we do. You've spent 10,000 years perfecting one way of fighting. We've spent our entire evolutionary history learning how to fight everything that wanted to kill us, and everything wanted to kill us." He gestured toward the assembled Federation representatives. "Your species conquered the stars by becoming the ultimate specialists. You the perfect warriors, them the perfect negotiators, others the perfect engineers or scientists or administrators. You each found your niche and excelled within it." Marcus paused, his gaze sweeping across the alien dignitaries who were hanging on his every word. Humans never had that luxury. We couldn't specialize because the thing trying to kill us kept changing. Ice ages, predators, diseases, each other. We had to become generalists. We had to learn how to learn. The implications of his words settled over the arena like a shadow. The Federation had built their civilization on the assumption that specialization was the path to dominance. They had created a society where each species filled a specific role, contributing their particular excellence to the greater whole. But what if generalization was superior to specialization? What if adaptability trumped perfection? The trial continues, announced the High Arbiter, though its harmonic frequencies betrayed uncertainty. Thakmor, do you yield? The Gorvian warrior looked at Marcus for a long moment, then at the assembled crowd, then back at the human who had just redefined everything they thought they knew about combat. No, he said finally. I do not yield, but I also do not think I can win. Marcus nodded with something that might have been approval. Then let's find out what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. The words hung in the air like a challenge to the fundamental laws of physics. Thakmor straightened to his full imposing height, but there was something different in his posture now. A warrior's acknowledgement that he faced not just an opponent, but a puzzle that might cost him everything to solve. The crowd had grown, restless, their various forms of communication creating a babel of sound that the translation systems struggled to parse. This wasn't the quick, decisive demonstration they had expected. Instead, they were witnessing something unprecedented, a combat scenario where the supposed inferior species was dictating the terms of engagement. Dr. Keth Nall of the Scientific Consortium had been taking discrete measurements throughout the engagement, her species' natural bioelectric sensors recording data that would revolutionize their understanding of human physiology. What she was detecting made no sense according to established xenobiology principles. Impossible metabolic efficiency, she whispered to her research partner. The human is operating at 97% energy conservation. Our models suggested their species maxed out at 60% under optimal conditions. And the neurals? Activity? Prompted her colleague. Off the charts, but not in the way we predicted. Instead of the chaotic firing patterns we expected from a stressed combat situation, his brain is operating in a state of perfect synchronization. It's like watching a quantum computer made of meat. Marcus, unaware of the scientific scrutiny, was focused entirely on his opponent. Thakmor had begun moving differently, not with the ceremonial precision of earlier, but with the desperate creativity of a being fighting for survival. The Gorvian was learning, adapting his tactics in real time. It was exactly what Marcus had hoped for. Better, he said as Thakmor attempted a feint followed by a low sweep that nearly caught him off guard. You're starting to fight like you want to win, not like you expect to. The next exchange was different from anything the crowd had seen before. Thakmor abandoned all pretense of honorable combat, using every dirty trick, every biomechanical advantage his species possessed. He sprayed acidic saliva that hissed where it hit the sand, used his secondary arms to throw handfuls of grit at Marcus's eyes, even attempted to use his greater mass to simply crush his opponent against the arena. While Marcus met each innovation with perfect adaptation, he flowed around the acid spray, caught the thrown sand and redirected it back at Thakmor's vulnerable optical clusters, and when the Gorvian tried to crush him, Marcus simply wasn't there to be crushed. But something new was happening. For the first time since the combat began, Marcus was being forced to work. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his breathing had deepened from the casual rhythm of someone taking a walk to the controlled pattern of an athlete under stress. The crowd noticed. A ripple of excitement ran through the assembled dignitaries, as they realized the human could be pushed to his limits. He's slowing down, observed Ambassador Velketh. The human's reaction time has decreased by approximately 7%. Irrelevant, countered War Leader Grax of the Crimson Fleet. The Gorvian is operating at 40% combat efficiency. At current rates of degradation, Thakmor will collapse from exhaustion before the human shows serious impairment. Lisa found herself gripping the rail so tightly, her knuckles had gone white. She could see what the aliens were discussing. Marcus was being tested in ways he hadn't been before, but she could also see something they were missing. He was smiling, not the grim satisfaction of a warrior gaining advantage, but the genuine pleasure of someone finally finding a worthy challenge. Marcus Reed had spent his entire military career being the best at what he did, and the loneliness of that excellence had carved deep hollows in his soul. For the first time in years, he was facing an opponent who could push him to his absolute limits. "Thank you," he said, as Thakmor's latest combination nearly caught him with a claw across the ribs. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to be challenged." The Gorvian warrior paused mid-attack, confusion evident in his compound eyes. "You enjoy this?" "I enjoy growth," Marcus corrected, "and you can't grow without resistance." It was a fundamentally human perspective that left the assembled aliens struggling to comprehend. Most species viewed combat as a necessary evil, a tool for acquiring resources or territory or status. The idea that someone might embrace conflict as a means of self-improvement was alien to their understanding. Thakmor, however, was beginning to grasp the concept. His own people had a warrior culture, but it was built around dominance and hierarchy. The strongest ruled, the weak served, and challenges were met with overwhelming force to establish clear superiority. This human approached combat like a form of communication, a dialogue conducted in the language of violence. "You could have ended this fight at any time," Thakmor realized aloud. "Yes." "Then why continue?" Marcus paused in his movement, standing, completely still while his opponent circled him warily. When he spoke, his words were directed not just at Thakmor, but at the entire assembly watching from above. "Because ending the fight isn't the point. Understanding each other is the point." The simple statement hit the gathering like a physical blow. The Federation had built their entire civilization on the principle of understanding, careful categorization, detailed analysis, predictable interactions between known quantities. But their understanding was clinical, sterile, built on observation from a safe distance. This human was proposing something far more intimate and dangerous: understanding through conflict, knowledge gained through the crucible of struggle. The trial was supposed to determine humanity's fitness for Federation membership, Marcus continued, his voice carrying easily through the arena. "But maybe we've been asking the wrong question." He turned to face the High Arbiter directly, ignoring Thakmor's ready stance. "Maybe the question isn't whether humans are fit for your Federation. Maybe it's whether your Federation is ready for humans." The words struck the assembly like a seismic shock, reverberating through the carefully ordered hierarchy of Federation politics. Conversations erupted in urgent whispers as representatives calculated the implications of what they had just heard. This wasn't a desperate species pleading for inclusion. This was a challenge to the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. High Arbiter Resonance of Stars felt harmonic dissonance cascading through the crystalline matrix of consciousness, probability streams fracturing into chaos. The carefully orchestrated trial had become something unprecedented, a moment where the established order faced genuine uncertainty. Ambassador Velketh was the first to find her voice, her translation, device struggling with the harmonics of barely controlled outrage. "The arrogance is staggering. A single human, from a species barely capable of interplanetary travel, questions the wisdom of a civilization that has maintained peace across 47 star systems for over 3 millennia. Marcus turned toward her voice, his expression calm but his eyes carrying depths that made several aliens unconsciously step backward. "Peace through subjugation isn't peace, it's just delayed conflict." "Subjugation?" War Leader Grax's mechanical augmentations whirred as he leaned forward aggressively. "The Federation offers protection, resources, technology, knowledge. We ask only for compliance with established protocols that ensure stability and prosperity. For all." "Compliance," Marcus repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. "Tell me, War Leader, when was the last time one of your member species proposed a genuinely new idea? When did someone suggest a different way of doing things that hadn't been approved by committee and filtered through 40 levels of bureaucracy?" The silence that followed was telling. Dr. Kethnal's bioelectric sensors were practically humming with the nervous energy radiating from the assembled dignitaries. The human had identified something they all knew, but rarely acknowledged. The Federation's stability came at the cost of innovation. Thakmor, who had been listening to this exchange with growing fascination, slowly lowered his combat stance. "You speak of stagnation." "I speak of death," Marcus replied, his attention returning to the Gorvian warrior. Entropy is the law of the universe. Everything that stops growing starts dying. Your Federation has achieved perfect equilibrium, which means it's already begun to decay. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine as she watched the aliens' reactions. Marcus wasn't just fighting for humanity's survival, he was deliberately provoking a civilizational crisis. The implications were staggering and terrifying in equal measure. The High Arbiter's harmonic voice rose above the growing cacophony. Human Marcus Reed, you suggest that our civilization is flawed. Yet you represent a species that has spent its entire recorded history engaged in warfare, environmental destruction, and self-defeating competition. What wisdom can you offer that we have not already surpassed? Marcus smiled, and there was something in that expression that made the assembled aliens suddenly remember that humans were predators. We offer the wisdom of survival. You've created a beautiful, stable civilization, but it's also brittle. When something comes along that doesn't fit your categories, your careful balance becomes a catastrophic weakness. He gestured toward Thakmor. Your greatest warrior just learned more about combat in the last 10 minutes than he had in the previous 10 years. Not because I'm superior, but because I forced him to adapt. That's what humans do. We break patterns, disrupt systems, force growth through controlled chaos. Controlled chaos is a contradiction in terms, observed the scientific consortium's representative. Is it? Marcus asked. Evolution is controlled chaos. Natural selection is controlled chaos. Every breakthrough in science, every leap in technology, every moment of genuine discovery. It all comes from introducing just enough disruption to break existing patterns without destroying the underlying system. Dr. Kethnal's sensors detected something extraordinary. The human's neural activity had shifted into patterns that resembled the quantum coherent states her species associated with prophetic insight. He wasn't just speaking from opinion, he was channeling some form of species-level wisdom that had been encoded in human consciousness through millions of years of evolutionary pressure. The trial, Thakmor said suddenly, his voice cutting through the philosophical debate. We should finish the trial. All attention returned to the arena, where the two combatants faced each other across sand marked by the traces of their earlier conflict. But something fundamental had changed. This was no longer about dominance or submission. It had become a ritual of mutual recognition. Are you ready? Marcus asked. Thakmor's compound eyes reflected something that might have been anticipation. Show me what you meant about adaptation. What followed wasn't a fight in any conventional sense. It was a conversation conducted in movement, a dance, where each partner pushed the other toward greater excellence. Marcus no longer simply avoided Thakmor's attacks. He guided them, redirected them, transformed them into opportunities for the Gorvian to discover new possibilities within his own capabilities. And Thakmor responded. Moment by moment, his movements became more fluid, more creative, more genuinely dangerous. He began combining techniques that had never been used together, improvising solutions to problems that had never existed before. The crowd watched in stunned silence as their perfect warrior was transformed before their eyes. This wasn't the methodical application of trained responses they had expected. This was genuine creativity emerging from the crucible of conflict. Impossible, whispered Ambassador Velketh. Gorvians don't innovate. Their neural architecture doesn't support creative adaptation. Their neural architecture supports whatever they need to survive, Marcus called out, somehow having heard her comment despite being fully engaged in combat. You just never gave them a reason to try. The implications hit the Federation representatives like a physical blow. If Marcus was right, if the supposed limitations of their member species were actually artifacts of their own rigid categorization, then everything they thought they knew about galactic civilization was wrong. And if they were wrong about that, what else had they been wrong about? The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished star, permeating the consciousness of every being in the arena. The Federation's carefully constructed understanding of species limitations was crumbling in real time, each impossible. Movement from Thakmor serving as another crack in the foundation of their galactic order. Dr. Kethnal abandoned all pretense of discrete observation, her bioelectric sensors now operating at maximum sensitivity as she documented what might be the most significant xenobiological discovery in Federation history. The Gorvian warriors' neural pathways were literally rewiring themselves, forming new connections that shouldn't have been possible according to everything they knew about his species' cognitive architecture. "This is unprecedented," she transmitted to the scientific consortium's data cores. "The Gorvian is exceeding established neural plasticity limits by factors of magnitude. If this level of adaptation is possible under stress conditions, our entire taxonomy of species capabilities requires fundamental revision." The response came back within nanoseconds, priority flagged with the highest classification. "Continue observation. Do not interfere. This data could revolutionize our understanding of evolutionary potential." Meanwhile, in the arena, Marcus and Thakmor had transcended the bounds of conventional combat. Their movements had become a kind of kinetic poetry, each exchange building upon the last, each moment of contact creating new possibilities for growth. The Gorvian's four-armed style had evolved beyond anything in his species' martial traditions, incorporating elements of flow and redirection that seemed impossibly elegant for such a massive frame. "You're not the same fighter who entered this ring," Marcus observed as they paused between exchanges, both breathing hard, but neither showing signs of true exhaustion. Thakmor's compound eyes reflected something that might have been wonder. "I am not the same being who entered this ring. How is this possible?" "Because you were never limited by your genetics," Marcus replied. "You were limited by your expectations." The philosophical implications sent ripples of unease through the assembled Federation representatives. Their entire civilization was built on the assumption that species had fixed capabilities, immutable roles, predetermined places in the galactic hierarchy. If that assumption was wrong, "The trial must conclude," announced the High Arbiter, harmonic frequencies betraying deep disturbance. This philosophical discourse, while fascinating, does not address the fundamental question of humanity's fitness for Federation membership. Marcus straightened, his attention shifting from Thakmor to the assembled dignitaries above. "Actually, it addresses something far more important: whether the Federation is capable of growth." He began walking toward the center of the arena, his movements carrying the unconscious confidence of someone who had already won a victory that others hadn't yet recognized. "You brought us here to demonstrate our inferiority. Instead, we've demonstrated your stagnation." War Leader Grax's mechanical augmentations sparked with barely controlled aggression. "Stagnation? We have maintained stability across 47 star systems for 3 millennia. Our member species enjoy prosperity, security, and purpose within the greater galactic community." "They enjoy the illusion of prosperity," Marcus countered. "Security purchased through the surrender of potential. Purpose defined by limitations, rather than possibilities." He gestured toward Thakmor, who stood transformed from the rigid warrior who had entered the ring. "Look at him. Look at what became possible the moment someone refused to accept that his capabilities were fixed. How many other members of your Federation have undiscovered potential that will never be realized because you've told them it doesn't exist?" Ambassador Velketh's voice carried the sharp harmonics of barely controlled panic. "You propose chaos, without established roles, without clear limitations, without hierarchical structure. Civilizations collapse into anarchy." "Do they?" Marcus asked. "Or do they evolve?" The question struck at the heart of the Federation's deepest fear. For 3,000 years, they had maintained order through careful categorization and controlled interaction. Each species knew its place, understood its role, accepted its limitations. The system worked because everyone believed it was the only system that could work. But Marcus was suggesting something revolutionary, that the system worked only as long as no one tested its boundaries. Lisa watched from above, her heart hammering. As she realized the true scope of what Marcus was attempting, this wasn't just about earning humanity's place in the galactic community. This was about fundamentally restructuring that community's understanding of what was possible. The High Arbiter's harmonic voice rose above the growing chaos of discussion. "Human Marcus Reed, you have demonstrated capabilities that exceeded our projections. However, the trial by combat remains incomplete. Thakmor, do you yield? The Gorvian warrior looked at Marcus, then up at the assembled Federation representatives, then back at the human, who had somehow transformed him into something greater than he had ever imagined possible. I yield, he said finally, but not in defeat. I yield in recognition that this human has taught me more about my own potential than 3 decades of Federation training. If this is what humanity offers, the ability to transcend limitations, we thought were absolute, then perhaps the question isn't whether they deserve membership in our Federation. He turned to face the High Arbiter directly, his stance carrying new authority that made several aliens unconsciously step backward. Perhaps the question is whether we deserve membership in theirs. The words fell into absolute silence, their implications too vast for immediate comprehension. The carefully ordered hierarchy of galactic civilization had just been challenged not by conquest or rebellion, but by the far more dangerous force of inspired possibility. Marcus smiled, and there was something in that expression that suggested this had been his plan all along. The trial is over, he said simply. Now the real conversation can begin. The silence that followed Marcus's declaration stretched across the arena like the event horizon of a black hole, a boundary between the known universe and something entirely unprecedented. The Federation representatives found themselves facing a choice that their 3 millennia of careful stability had never prepared them for. Evolution or extinction. High Arbiter. Resonance of stars felt the crystalline matrix of collective consciousness fracturing under the weight of infinite possibility. Every probability cascade the entity had calculated over the past hour led to the same terrifying conclusion. The universe had fundamentally changed, and there was no path back to the comfortable certainty of their established order. You propose to dissolve everything we have built, the Arbiter said, harmonic frequencies carrying undertones of something that might have been grief. 3,000 years of peace, stability, and prosperity. Marcus shook his head, his expression carrying compassion for the fear he could sense in the assembled beings. I propose to build on what you've created, not destroy it. You've established something remarkable, a framework for cooperation between radically different species. But frameworks aren't meant to be prisons. Dr. Kethnal's sensors detected massive neural activity spikes throughout the crowd as beings who had spent their entire civilizations accepting fixed roles suddenly contemplated unlimited potential. The bioelectric patterns were unlike anything in her species' extensive databases. This was consciousness expanding in real time, minds breaking free of constraints they hadn't even known existed. Thakmor stepped forward, his transformed presence commanding attention in ways his former rigid adherence to protocol never could. I have served the Federation for 37 years. I believed I understood my purpose, my capabilities, my place in the galactic order. In 37 minutes, this human has shown me that everything I thought I knew was wrong. His compound. I swept across the assembled dignitaries, and several unconsciously leaned backward from the intensity of his gaze. How many of you are living lives smaller than your potential? How many of our species have accepted limitations that exist only in our minds? The questions struck home with devastating accuracy. Ambassador Velketh's tentacles writhed with distress as she contemplated the diplomatic protocols that had defined her entire existence. War leader Grax's mechanical augmentations sparked as he considered strategic paradigms he had never questioned. Throughout the assembly, beings who had found security in defined roles suddenly faced the terrifying freedom of infinite possibility. This is madness, whispered someone in the crowd, though the universal translators couldn't identify the speaker. Civilization requires order, structure, predictability. Marcus turned toward the voice, his expression gentle but implacable. Civilization requires adaptation. Everything else is just elaborate stagnation. He began walking slowly around the arena's perimeter, his voice carrying to every corner of the amphitheater. The universe is not stable. Stars are born and die, galaxies collide, entropy increases with every passing second. The only way to survive in a changing universe is to become better at changing than the forces trying to destroy you. Lisa felt tears she hadn't expected running down her cheeks as she watched Marcus articulate truths that humanity had learned through millions of years of brutal evolution. They had sent him here expecting him to fight for their species' survival, but he was fighting for something far greater, the survival of consciousness itself in a universe that demanded constant growth or inevitable death. Your Federation has achieved something beautiful, Marcus continued, his words weaving through the crowd like music that harmonized with frequencies they hadn't known they could hear. You've created peace between species that might otherwise have destroyed each other. You've built a framework for cooperation that spans light years and encompasses radically different forms of consciousness. That's not something to be discarded. It's something to be transcended. The High Arbiter's crystalline form pulsed with conflicting energies as ancient programming warred with emerging possibilities. And if we accept your proposal, if we abandon the structures that have maintained stability for millennia, what prevents collapse into chaos? Marcus stopped walking and turned to face the entity directly, his human eyes meeting a form of consciousness that existed in dimensions beyond normal perception. What prevented your species from collapsing into chaos when you first encountered others unlike yourselves? What prevented any of your member species from destroying themselves during their technological adolescence? The questions hung in the air like challenges to the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization. Each species represented in the Federation had faced moments of existential crisis during their development, points where they could have destroyed themselves or transcended their limitations. They had survived by choosing growth over stagnation, cooperation over isolation, evolution over extinction. Adaptation, Thakmor said quietly, the word carrying the weight of revelation. We survived because we learned to change. And then, you stopped, Marcus added gently. You found a configuration that worked and decided it was perfect, but perfection is another word for death. It means you've stopped growing. Dr. Kethnal's readings showed something unprecedented occurring throughout the assembly. Neural activity patterns were shifting across multiple species simultaneously, consciousness expanding beyond established parameters as beings contemplated possibilities their cultures had forgotten existed. War leader Grax's mechanical voice carried uncharacteristic uncertainty. If limitations are illusions, if our understanding of species capabilities is fundamentally flawed, then everything we've built is based on false assumptions. Not false, Marcus corrected. Incomplete. You built your civilization on the assumption that consciousness was fixed, that potential was predetermined, that growth had natural limits. Those assumptions allowed you to create stability, but they also created stagnation. He gestured toward the transformed Thakmor, whose very existence now challenged everything the Federation thought it knew about Gorvian capabilities. The truth is more beautiful and more terrifying than your assumptions. Consciousness isn't fixed, it's infinite. Potential isn't predetermined, it's unlimited. Growth doesn't have natural limits, it has artificial ones that exist only as long as we accept them. The implications cascaded through the crowd like waves of revelation. If Marcus was right, then every member species of the Federation possessed undiscovered capabilities that could revolutionize their understanding of what was possible. The careful categorization that had maintained order for 3 millennia might have been systematically limiting the very beings it was meant to protect. Ambassador Vel Keth's voice carried harmonics of wonder and terror in equal measure. You're suggesting that our entire civilization is a cage we've built for ourselves. I'm suggesting that your civilization is a cocoon, Marcus replied, and cocoons serve their purpose. They provide protection during a vulnerable stage of development. But eventually what's inside has to break free or die. The metaphor struck with devastating clarity. The Federation's stability, its careful structure, its protective limitations, all of it suddenly seemed less like permanent architecture and more like temporary scaffolding around something that was ready to emerge. High Arbiter Resonance of Stars felt the crystalline matrix of collective consciousness reaching a critical decision point. The entity could feel probability streams converging toward a moment of irreversible change, a transformation that would either elevate galactic civilization to unprecedented heights or shatter it beyond repair. Human Marcus Reed, the arbiter, said, "Harmonic frequencies carrying the weight of civilizational destiny. You have fulfilled the conditions of trial by combat. Thakmor the Undefeated has yielded to your capabilities. By the laws of the Federation, humanity has earned the right to provisional membership," a pause that stretched across eternities. However, the question before us now transcends the original terms of this trial. You propose not membership in our Federation, but transformation of our Federation into something entirely unprecedented. The risks are incalculable. Marcus nodded, understanding the magnitude of what he was asking. The risks of growth are always incalculable, but the risks of stagnation are certain, slow decay followed by inevitable death. The universe doesn't allow consciousness to stand still. "Then let us choose growth," Thakmor said suddenly, his voice carrying authority that made the assembled dignitaries turn toward him in surprise. "Let us choose the terrifying beauty of unlimited potential over the comfortable prison of assumed limitations." One by one, other voices joined his. Dr. Keth Null spoke for the Scientific Consortium. "The data supports unprecedented possibilities for discovery." A representative of the Spiral Confederation added their support. "Our people have legends of capabilities we thought were myths." Even War Leader Grax's mechanical voice carried something like excitement. "Strategic paradigms based on infinite adaptation could revolutionize our understanding of conflict resolution." The wave of consensus built slowly but inexorably until even Ambassador Velketh's diplomatic caution gave way to inspired possibility. "Perhaps it is time for our civilization to take its next evolutionary step." High Arbiter Resonance of Stars felt the collective consciousness of the Federation reaching unanimous agreement on something that would have been impossible just hours before. The entity's crystalline form pulsed with frequencies that hadn't been heard since the Federation's founding 3 millennia ago, the harmonics of civilizational birth. "Then let it be recorded," the Arbiter announced, harmonic voice carrying across space and time to Federation worlds throughout the galaxy, "that on this day, the Federation of Galactic Civilizations chose growth over security, possibility over certainty, evolution over stagnation." The entity's form blazed with light that seemed to contain all the colors that had ever existed. "We accept not humanity's membership in our Federation, but partnership in creating something entirely new. A civilization based not on fixed roles and assumed limitations, but on infinite potential and eternal growth." Marcus Reed, former Marine sergeant, stood in the center of an alien arena on a world 43 light-years from Earth, and smiled as he watched the birth of something unprecedented in galactic history, a civilization that chose to embrace the terrifying, beautiful infinity of what consciousness might become. Above him, Commander Lisa Vale wiped tears from her eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever force had given humanity the wisdom to send exactly the right person to represent everything their species could offer the universe. In the arena below, Thakmor approached Marcus and extended one massive clawed hand in the universal gesture of respect between warriors. When Marcus clasped it without hesitation, the Gorvian's compound eyes reflected something that transcended species boundaries. The recognition of kindred spirits committed to the endless journey of becoming more than they had ever imagined possible. "What happens now?" Thakmor asked. Marcus's smile carried the infinite confidence of a species that had learned to thrive on uncertainty. "Now we find out what we're really capable of." The words echoed across the arena and beyond, carrying to Federation worlds throughout the galaxy where billions of conscious beings were about to discover that the limitations they had accepted as absolute were nothing more than starting points for journeys they had never dared to imagine. The age of human expansion into the galaxy had begun not with conquest or submission, but with the most powerful force in the universe, the inspiration to grow beyond everything that had ever been thought possible. And in the end, that made all the difference.